Hi, this is Scott, Kilo Sierra 6 Delta Alpha Yankee, and for today's video, I want to do a real quickie on Go boxes. And in particular, I want to profile the Go box that I happen to use quite a lot. And when I say use quite a lot, I actually use this Go box right here 3 times a week, every single week. And I do that for reasons that I'll profile in another video. But I use this a lot. I've been using it now for several years. Since I built it, I had a very specific idea and a very specific concept in mind, and I can tell you that at least for me, it met my expectations 100%, dead on. It does exactly what I want it to do. It's set up exactly the way I want it to be set up, and it works perfectly for me. Now, this may be different for you, and you might actually be a little disappointed with the Spartan nature of this rig once I open it up and show you what's inside. But I guess I should start off by explaining what is the concept and what was I trying to do with this and why does it work so well. Here's the idea. The purpose of this Go box is to get a 50-watt dual band UHF VHF mobile radio out to the field and be able to operate that radio in the field, so that having a radio with more output wattage, a radio that's able to withstand a higher duty cycle. For a lot of reasons, it's important to be able to get a more effective radio out there than something like an HT. So to get the radio out to the field, you need to do so in such a way that the radio is not damaged in transit, and everything you need to support the radio is contained in one container. And that once you're in the field, you can operate the radio from that container, and it is an efficient workspace for that operation when you're doing so. So the very first thing I identified was it needs to go into some kind of tough, somewhat weatherproof container. Now, I do understand the moment you start punching holes in one of these Pelican type cases, you remove its capability to be, submersible. But even though you popped holes in it, if you do it right, it's going to be at least somewhat weather resistant. So knowing that I was going to be drilling holes in the case, I went with one of the Harbor Freight Apache type cases. The exact number, I do not recall. It's 14 something, 1415, 1435. I will actually get the number and put it in the description for the video if you're interested. But when it comes to these cases, there are 2 medium-sized cases that just have the 2 latches on the front and no latches on the side. And there's a bigger one and there's a smaller one. This is the smaller of the 2 if you're looking for a visual reference. So, and I did so because this perfectly fits the radio that goes within, as you'll see. So I knew I was going to be punching holes in it, wanted to go low price. Why punch a bunch of holes in a super expensive Pelican case? Doesn't make any sense. So that's the route that I went. So I get one of these cases. Now the next thing I wanted was, if I'm in the field and I've got this thing hooked up to an antenna, well, I have the radio hooked up to an antenna and a power supply. I wanted actually to be able to do that, have those peripherals plugged into the unit and still be able to close the lid. So the thought is this: you're out in the field, you've got the radio in a box, you open up the lid, you hook the antenna up and the power supply. Some bad weather blows in and you got rain that's driving, at a 45-degree angle into your face, and you need to cover the radio up. Before you can do that, you have to now undo the antenna and undo the power supply to close the lid. So I thought, I want my power supply and my antenna inputs to be on the outside of the case so that they, bulkhead through and connect to the radio on the inside. Then I can close the radio and leave those things connected. So that'll be the first thing we're going to look at. Is the antenna port, is this bulkhead connection right here. It's the type that's threaded on both sides. You got the 4 little screw holes. This cap is sold separately. Usually, I think they come in like a pack of 5 or 10. I know I've got a bunch of them. And what this does is this both weatherproofs, and it just keeps dust and gunk and dirt off of the antenna connection while you're in transit. So the antenna plugs in there, and as I said, I can close the lid and still keep the radio connected to an antenna. So these little covers, though, didn't cost a heck of a lot, and everything you're looking at here was purchased off of Amazon. It's not hard to find, simple search, and you can find this stuff, and it's not super expensive. Another thing I'll tell you, for punching holes in these cases, you're going to want to get one of those stepper drill bits. The stepper bit is it's indispensable for making the holes necessary to be able to mount these things, because they're usually a bit larger than the typical drill bit set has. On the lid of the radio, you're going to see those two rubber pieces there. Those actually are the screws that mount the faceplate for the radio to the inside of the lid. Those are weather protected as well, in case any water builds up in these little waffle patterns here. It keeps water from seeping into the radio. On the other side, we have an Anderson power pole bulkhead connection so that I can plug my power in here. So first goal is achieved. I can have power and antenna hooked up to the radio and still have the lid closed. Now, I can't operate it with the lid closed, but I can at least protect everything from rain or dust in the meantime. At the bottom, these two T-nuts right here, these actually are for the bracket for the head unit for the radio. It's the same bracket that you would use to mount it in the vehicle. I went with the T-nuts for a couple of reasons. The first of which is it's got a nice big base, so that if you get any flex from that head unit on the bracket, it's not going to round out the hole on the radio itself. And also, it's a fairly flush mount, so that it's actually below these ridges on the waffle pattern here, so the radio actually sits in a nice stable way. And that is the outside. So at this point, what I want to do is reposition the tripod, and we'll take a look at the contents inside the radio. Actually, I can get the first part of that done right here. Let's open this up real quick, and let's do that. How about that? And I'll reposition in just a second, and we'll look at the internal contents. But the first thing I want to direct your attention to is the head unit on the lid here. Now, when it comes to setting these go boxes up based on this type of case, you're going to want to consider a radio that has a removable faceplate. The reason is this: if you have a radio that doesn't have a removable faceplate, when you mount it inside of the case itself, it's going to be so low that you're not going to be able to see the actual display on the radio. So once you get the radio mounted in there, then you're going to have some mechanism for tilting the radio up so you can see what's going on there. With a removable head, though, you can easily mount it to the lid. And when I open this up and I'm in a seated position, this is right at eye level, I can see everything that I need to see, and we're good to go. Now, something that I considered for this area right here was, I thought at one point I'd put some Velcro on there and actually mount one of those little small whiteboards on there. And then I thought also of maybe a little mesh bag with a zipper on it, so that I could put some little trinkets and treasures in there. I haven't ever gotten around to doing either of those things, because my go bag pretty much does those purposes. And as far as writing anything down, I use just a spiral bound notebook. So that would be extra faff and nonsense, and I just have, like I said, I haven't gotten around to it. But there's usable space here to do that with. But one thing that happens is, the second you have usable space on something and you're doing a DIY project, we tend to like to fill it with a whole lot of garbage and nonsense, and I find I have to struggle to keep from doing that. And I guess that would explain why that's still an open, unused space. So at this point, we'll go ahead and break for just a second, and I want to get the tripod reset so we can actually look down into the contents of the case itself. So hang on just a second. Okay, this is what it looks like every time I open up the case. We've got all the parts and pieces here, as well as the support equipment that goes to the field with the radio. So the first thing you'll note, we have our microphone, which is attached to the faceplate unit and kind of stays in that position. So we put that off to the side. Not really much to talk about there. Not meaning to talk about the radio today. That might be for the subject of another video later. The next thing that comes out is going to be my external speaker. Now, this serves two purposes. The first of which is it's just simply louder and has better audio quality than the speaker that's on the radio itself. And if I'm in a fairly compact environment where I'm going to be seated right in front of the go box and I really won't be getting up or moving around, it sits on top of the radio nicely like so. But if I'm on a larger work surface, and I might be a few feet away from the radio, I can actually move this several feet away from the radio itself, and that way I can keep track of the audio, and I don't have to stay hovering over the box to hear what's going on. And that simply plugs into the external port on the back of the radio itself. The last thing that comes out is going to be our power connection cord, and this of course is Anderson power poles on each end, and it would plug into the port that I showed you earlier, and the other end of course would go into my power supply. Now looking to the inside, you can see the back side of both of those bulkhead connections there that are set up. The power connection actually has the Anderson power pole on here. The reason for this is this. If I'm going to the field with this box, I'm probably going in my truck. In my truck is another radio exactly like this, so that if this radio goes bad, I can simply pull the one from my truck, which has an Anderson power pole connector on it, and simply replace this radio and put the functional one into the box and stay in the game. So it allows me to be able to take the radio out without having to mess with cutting wires and crimping things together. Now the radio, as I said, we're not going to talk much about that. It's a TYT TH7800. If I didn't mention that earlier, I just did. You can see here this extra cordage that I have for the faceplate. It's one thing I don't like, actually. At some point I need to shorten this, cut that excess off, and it's just simply going to require breaking those connections and then soldering everything together. That just simply haven't gotten around to that. The antenna connection, I of course have this small patch cord here. I do understand, just in case you want to point it out in the comments section, that every connection you put into the feed line does cause a certain amount of loss. I do get that, so you don't need to make that comment in the connection, or in the don't need to make that comment. I already know. Everyone else does too. But I think at this point, let me deal with your level of disappointment at looking at the inside of my Go box, because I don't have a cool panel with a fan and a bunch of kill switches and gauges and doodads and bells and whistles on here. I apologize. This is kind of a simple Spartan approach, and that's fine. I have looked at doing those other kinds of Go boxes, and I got to tell you, I appreciate the innovation and the engineering that some people put into building theirs out. They're pretty awesome looking, but pretty much all of that, it's flare. I mean, if we're going to be honest, it's pretty much flare. I'll put it to you like this. I tried to build one of those at one point, and as I was building it, I kept getting into logical arguments with myself, because I was like, oh, well, this thing needs a master kill switch. I got a master kill switch right there, for the radio at least. I have master kill switches on my power boxes. Why do I need another one? Why do I need another toggle switch that I can, flip up and click and probably say engage and go? It's redundancy. It's unnecessary. The next thing would be, what other switches would I have on there? I don't know. Maybe I'd have some lights on there, because you see people put lights on them and stuff. And I have lights. I already have lights. I've got lights all over the place. I don't really need a light on here. Besides, this lights up. The display lights up. I don't really need to see anything in here, so we're sort of good to go. The next thing would be, okay, well, it's on there so you don't have all these unsightly wires showing. Okay, I guess there's that. But I want you to consider something, okay? Let's, again, always keep your mission in mind whenever you're designing a piece of gear. What's the mission here? To get the 50-watt mobile rig to the field. Once it's in the field, then all the accessories are removed from the box, because you need to be able to store this stuff. If you have a cover on here, all that stuff that I pulled out of here, I now have to store somewhere else. And if I have to store it somewhere else, there's a possibility it might get forgotten and not arrive in the field with the radio. If it's in the Go box, it's not going to get left behind. But if I have a cover on here, now I don't have storage. So, okay, there's that. Then there's the next mission, is once you're in the field, you need to be able to operate the radio from the box. So if I have a cover on here, here's something that's going to happen immediately. You're going to start having problems with heat. Heat problems with the radio. Because you have a cover on here, these radios actually build up quite a lot of heat. Now, the way the radio works for cooling itself off is on the back of the radio you have this heat sink right here. Bolted to the heat sink you have a fan. Now the fan, despite what you might think, does not blow air inside of the radio itself. It blows air onto the heat sink that draws the heat out of the radio to the outside atmosphere. So what's important for this system to work is it has to have a supply of cool air on the outside of the radio in order to cool this off. If the first thing you do is put a cover on this, the air that comes off this heat sink is going to stay in and around the radio, and it's not going to cool as efficiently. Well, you say, I'll put an exhaust fan on there. Okay, you're going to have to make sure, though, you do some research, and you may just put a fan on there, but you need another hole somewhere else on the other side, because you need to be drawing cool air into this cavity and then be pulling the hot air out of the cavity. So there's a bit of thermodynamic engineering that's going to need to go into the project. If you don't have the cover on at all, these are things you now do not have to worry about. Because without the cover on here, I've got all the air I need circulating around the radio. And if you know anything again about thermodynamics, you know that hot air rises. So if there's nothing trapping it, it'll rise and go away from the radio, leaving regular temperature air in and around the radio to help cool the radio down. So not having a cover on here and not having all those cool bells and whistles and switches saves me a lot of potential breakage points. It also allows me to keep the radio cool while it's operating, and it gives me usable space within the container to make sure that the accessories needed for the radio arrive with the radio to the field. So that explains why I have this set up. And I can tell you, after a couple of years of using this system, it works. It works quite well. So there's really not much else to look at this point. You've had plenty of time to take a close-up look at everything on here. Not much else really to lay out. So that's my Go box. Now, I will be talking about other Go boxes in the future, specifically Go boxes for HF radios. I've got a couple of projects there that I'm messing around with, and I'll be taking a completely different approach, and there we'll be talking about the use of a thing called a rack case, R-A-C-K, a rack case, and using those to set up actually several radios and things like tuners and all kinds of other cool stuff. So, but this sucker works, and it works, and it works, and it works. So I will thank you for watching and or listening. This is Scott, Kilo Sierra 6, Delta Alpha Yankee from Visalia, California. Have a wonderful day.